Shalom. Welcome to the Torah of Messiah, Torah HaMashiach. We're going to continue our study on the prophetic Messianic life. And we had started in Passover last week. And we had a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it was, I think, kind of necessary. So we're going to pick up there. We're going to backtrack just a tiny bit to clarify something. But before we do that, just a reminder that we teach that Yeshua is the Son of God, that he died for the propitiation of our sins. All of us are sinners, that he rose from the dead after 3 days, and that our trust in him and that alone saves us. But he requires us, compels us, to move further into a consecrated life, a set-apart life, and we do that by obeying his mitzvot. So we're trying to teach here how that is done very clearly. So if anybody had any lingering questions, I like to usually take a little bit of time to let others log in. And if you had any lingering questions from last week, let me know. Shalom, Janet. Howdy, Joe. We'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll pray and get started. If you haven't noticed, I did post an image on the page that you should have logged in from, and we're going to start with that tonight. Hopefully to clarify how Pesakh is calculated and observed, and especially how it was observed by Yeshua. Shalom, Daniel. So if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know if you can watch and look at it and find it at the same time, but you need to get access to that image because it's going to play a big part in what we're going to do tonight. Shalom, Jim. I'll give it just one more minute and then we'll pray. Get started. No questions? Okay. People are slow logging in tonight. We're busy. All right, so let's get started. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Yahweh noten haTorah, b'shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Okay, so as I've kind of already stated, we started with Pesach last week, and we are trying to look at the Shalom, Tracy. We're trying to look at the prophetic nature of it, but at the same time teach sort of the details about it. So we kind of breezed through it a little bit in regard to how to calculate it or observe it. In regard to the timing of it. So I wanted to backtrack and I wanted to put together a sort of some material, something to look at so that you visual people can see it better. I know it always helps me. I should probably send that to my wife who's watching in the next room. Let me do that, and then we'll get a move on. she doesn't do Facebook, so she's oblivious to it. Well, I can find the file. Suddenly I can't find the file. Oh well, we'll have to move on. I don't know what to do. Make another one. There we go. All right. So hopefully you're still with me. Okay. Shalom, shalom. Yeah, I like my Shalom Y'all shirt. Okay, so we are going to go back to Shemot chapter 12, Exodus chapter 12. I'm going to read a couple of verses. The first one I'm going to read is going to be, I'll start in verse 3. Speaking to all the assembly of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this Chodesh, they shall take to them every man a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And let me skip down, so we're on the 10th day. Verse 6, and you shall keep it unto the 14th day of the same Chodesh, and the whole of the congregational assembly of Israel shall kill it at dusk. And the dusk there is Bein Ha'arabim, between the evenings. And that is actually defined in the Bible as dusk. And it's specifically, there are 2 times that are mentioned that confirm that this is sundown. And one of those is the lighting of the menorah. Aharon, when the menorah was to be lit for the very first time, and all subsequent times after that, Aaron was specifically commanded to light it Bein Ha'arabim, and that's at dusk. It gets translated that way in most Bibles, at dusk or evening or sundown. The second place we see that used is in Shemot, I want to say chapter 16, and it was to define the evening again, but the way that it was described there is that when these particular type of birds would come in and nest, and I want to say they're egrets. We used to call them cowbirds up in East Texas. You could see them every evening heading down to the lake to nest for the evening. And so dusk is the time that the lamb on the 14th was to be slain. And so if you look at your diagram, I want to explain this a little bit. So we're going from right to left because, and if that looked like left to right, I apologize because I think the camera reverses things for me. We're going from right to left. That's why there's a big arrow up at the top right. So I want to read the little paragraph on the far right. Biblical days start at sundown and end the next day at sundown. That is established in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It's one of the very first things God did is define what a day is. And a day is an evening and a morning. And so the biblical days, even today in Jewish society, the day starts at the evening when the sun goes down. And Yeshua had his Seder on a Tuesday night. He was executed on Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. He was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, starting on Wednesday night, rising from the dead on Saturday night. At Motzei Shabbat, and that's a term for Saturday night when the Havdalah ceremony is held, at the departure of the Sabbath. And there's one of the Gospels that actually says that when the Sabbath was leaving, in other words, Motzei Shabbat. That's at Saturday night, well after sundown. One of the translations says at deep dark, or while it was still deeply dark. So Yeshua was, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my voice. Yeshua was executed. He had his Seder on the night of the 14th. If you look, there's a blue line from Yeshua's Seder going down to the flame on the candle. That's why I wanted to use this particular menorah, because that shows you that that was nighttime when Yeshua had his Seder, and that was Tuesday night. So you have Tuesday day in yellow, and then you have Tuesday night on the flame itself, and that's when Yeshua had his Seder. If you remember, he goes out into the Mount of Olives, into the garden, and he prays there, and he wrestles with God, and he sweats blood because he knows what's coming. He knows he's about to perish and how painful and horrible it's going to be. And and then he gets arrested way late in the night, and they take him to trial to Herod, who was in Jerusalem at the time, and they took him to trial actually they took him to the Sanhedrin first, which was a kangaroo court because not all of them were there. It was just the high priest and his friends. Then they took him to Pilate, and then they took him to Herod, then they take him back to Pilate, and by the daytime his trial is over, and he is executed at 3 o'clock. And that is the moment when our Jewish people began their Passover. So they're a full 18 hours or so late on killing the Passover lamb. And I wanted to clarify that. Why then is it so different from what we do? There was already hot debate in the Jewish community back then. They weren't unified on when the Passover was, and the Pharisees had moved it for some reason. They moved it from evening on the 14th to 3 o'clock for the temple service, and it was this, if I'm not mistaken, it was the house of Shammai. They were Pharisees. The Pharisees had two schools of thought and two houses. It'd be like two different universities trying to teach the same thing, competing with one another. And the house or school of Shammai was the ruling house among the Pharisees. They had grown bigger in number and had taken over, and they were in control of the temple, if I'm not mistaken. And so they moved the Passover from the evening of the 14th to the day of the 14th. And you got to remember, biblical days start at night. And so that top line of the naming of the days, those are just Roman names, okay? You should, and if I could have, had I had room, maybe I could add it to the bowls under there. We could number the bowls from right to left, 1 through 7, and that would be the days it would have to start on 3, because Tuesday is the third day. So we could start on 3 and number the days. That is because Passover moves around. Nonetheless, he's executed at 3 o'clock. He told us he had to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. He was very specific about that. And so we believe it. And so, because days start at night, the count for nights and days started on Wednesday at night. That's why that first one is on the flame. And then the first day is Thursday. Thursday night is day 2 in the grave. And the day for that one is the Roman Friday. Friday night, because the Roman day is different. It's still Friday on that when night falls for the Roman calendar. So Friday night is the beginning of the third day, and Saturday day is the end of the third day. And so Yeshua rises from the dead at deep dark, at Havdalah, at Motzei Shabbat. So if you look at that left paragraph, Shemot 12 tells us that Passover begins on the beginning of the 14th day at evening. It goes up until And that word there is ad, and that means up to and not beyond, up to and not into, up to that point and no further. So, meaning it did not, Passover did not go into, according to God, not according to me, the 21st day. And so that's why you see that 21 sticking off there to the left. What am I looking at? There was a picture that I posted on our Torah page, the Torah of Messiah Facebook page, Tracy. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. It scrolls down on me. I don't see it sometimes. Thank you, Joe, for explaining that. Hopefully she found it. I tried to post it early, but it wasn't very early. So if you look at a Jewish calendar today, take this year. This year is perfect. So if you want to see this, you can go to the Jewish calendar. And this year, they overlapped perfectly, just like they did in the time of Messiah. Why do I have to say that? Because our Jewish people calculated a calendar about back in 600 AD, so about 500 years ago, actually 1,500 years ago. They calculated a calendar, and so they don't observe the Chodesh anymore, and they had moved the Passover, and they keep 8 days instead of 7. So if you look at a Jewish calendar, it's completely different. But if you look at it for this year, you will see that there are indeed 8 days, and they still give the 14th a nod, and they say Pesakh 1, but they actually keep their Passover on the night of the 15th. Because of the Pharisaical moving of the slaughter of the lamb from evening until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I always say that Yeshua was executed at that time because they weren't keeping it the right way. So because they were breaking the Torah, they didn't recognize the lamb. So So today, if you look at a Jewish calendar, if you look at it for this year, 2020, you'll see back in April that they kept it all the way up to the 22nd day for Matzot. In other words, they kept a full, they gave the 14th a nod, they started Passover on the 15th, and they kept it for 8 days. It goes all the way to the 22nd. So, anyway, it's entirely different from what Yeshua did. So Yeshua was executed on the 14th at night. He was put in the grave at sundown on the 15th. Remember, he was executed at 3 o'clock. It took him 3 hours to die. That would be 6 o'clock, right before sundown, because this is early spring. He was in the grave on Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and Thursday day, Friday day, and Saturday day, and he rose on Saturday night. And so that should clear up why we do what we do. And if you look at this, that is 7 days, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 are 7 full days of Pesach and Matzot. So Pesach is the 14th, the whole day, starting at night. And Matzot is the 15th through the 20th, including the 14th. Okay, because we do eat matzah on the 14th at our Passover Seder. And like Deuteronomy 16, like we pointed out last week in Deuteronomy 16, it says after you have the Passover, then you're going to eat matzah for 6 more days. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's 6 days. So hopefully that's clear for everybody. I'm going to take a little break and give you a chance to comment or ask a question. And then we'll move on to some details about Pesach that a lot of people don't look at. Any questions or comments? Bueller? Well, you have to say something, Kevin. I didn't see you. Shalom, Kevin. Is anybody there? Did I lose y'all? It's hard for me to tell. What time of day did Moshe sacrifice the lambs? That would have been at the evening, at dusk. That's what God said to do in Shemot. And if you look in Shemot chapter 12, verse 6, and you shall keep it unto the 14th day of the same Chodesh, the first Chodesh, and the whole of the congregational assembly of Israel shall kill it at dusk. That's when it was executed or slaughtered. Yeshua was executed, the lamb was slaughtered. Yeshua was slaughtered. He is our sacrifice. So it's very plain to me that at sundown on the 14th, given that biblical days start at night, that Moshe did it at dusk. That's what it says that he did. And so then you see 7 days in verse 15 of Shemot. 7 days shall you eat matzot. Our Jewish community does not start eating matzah on the 14th day. They don't start eating it until the 15th. And they go all the way through 8 days of eating matzah. Thanks for the feedback. Every once in a while, either a question or some feedback would be good. Otherwise, I feel like I'm alone here. 7 days you shall not eat matzah. You shall eat matzah. The first day you'll put seor out of your houses. The first day is the 14th. Put seor out of your houses. For whoever eats chametz, which is leavened bread, from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in the first day, there shall be a mikra kodesh, set apart, sacred congregational assembly, if you will. That's the first day. That's the 14th. And then, and in the 7th day, a mikra kodesh. So the next assembly has to be on the 20th. 14th is the first, 20th is the 7th. And so what I need to make clear for you, and I know this gets confusing because it's Roman days versus biblical days. It's days that have names versus days that have numbers. It's days that have dates. And the dates are always different on the Roman calendar than on the Jewish calendar and then on the biblical calendar. It's all mixed up. That's what Babel does. Babel is confusion. Babylon is confusion. Religion comes in and distorts the Word of God and confuses everybody. We're trying to clear this up. And I think it's pretty simple once you understand and lock it in that biblical days start at night. And God was very plain about this. Up to the 21st day, not into, up to. On the first day, the 14th, you shall have a sacred assembly. On the 7th day, the 20th, you shall have a sacred assembly. That's 7 days of eating matzah. If you compare this to the calendar, the Jewish calendar, if you go to hebcal.com and set up the calendar to show you all of the holy days, and then go back to April, because Pesakh was in April of this year, you see what they did. And then you have to remember what we did. The thing about this year, it was the same as it was in the time of Yeshua, according to the Chodesh. Yeshua kept his Pesach on the 14th. Their Chodesh was at the same time, so their 15th is our 15th. They started at the same. If they had lambs, they would have executed or slaughtered a lamb at 3 o'clock on the 15th and started their Passover Seder that night. Okay? That's not how Yeshua and his Talmudim did it. The Pharisees did it that way, but the Sadducees and other groups and the lay people seemed to be split. The people who were just Jews, they weren't part of any religious sect. They seemed to be split, but our Talmudim come to Yeshua on the day leading up to the 14th, on the day of the 13th, they come to Yeshua and said, "Where do you want to have Passover tonight?" And they clearly had their Passover that night, and then the next day Yeshua was arrested before they were having their Passover. We're told that the Pharisees did not want him hanging on the tree at Passover, so because they had to be clean for the first high day. Yeshua and his Talmudim kept the first high day on the 14th, like the scriptures say. So it gets confusing because Roman dates would be in there. I can't remember the dates. I think the 14th was on the 8th of April, and so you get another number thrown in the mix, and it adds to the confusion. What we're looking at here, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, are the number of days from the crescent moon. So the crescent moon was seen one evening, and 14 evenings later, that's when we have Passover. So hopefully you're understanding this. Anybody still clear as mud? Any part of that you don't understand? I think next week we might try Zoom since our group is so small, see what happens. Because it would be better to have instant feedback instead of waiting for a week to get a little text message. But we shall see. So most of you, I can't tell who all's on. I don't think anybody incredibly new is on here. There's one person who's relatively new, but very savvy. So, but I can't see all the names of who's logged on. So, we're going to go to Yochanan chapter 13. Bueller, yeah. So we're going to go to 13, and I want to look at some different aspects of Pesach regarding the prophetic nature of it. And it does have to do with our future, even though that the biggest part of what Yeshua did, he fulfilled Passover, but part of it is still hanging in our future. Okay? And similarly, and almost conversely, he partly fulfilled Sukkot, and that's it. There's one little part of Sukkot that he did when he was here, and some of you, if you're smart enough, you know what that is, or you'll figure it out. And then he'll fulfill the rest of that when he puts his foot down. So for Passover, it's just the opposite. He fulfilled most of what Passover was meant to foreshadow, but there's a little piece that remains. Whereas Sukkot, he fulfilled a little tiny piece of it, and there's so much of it that remains. And that goes back to the idea of time being a spiral, and those feasts overlapping on the spiral of time. If you say that one revolution around the spiral is 6 months, which I believe it would be, then they overlap. If you look down through it or up through it, then you've got the feasts, the spring feasts, overlapping the fall feast, and in particular Passover. Passover starts on the 14th, Sukkot starts on the 15th. And so they're almost directly lined up over one another. So in Yochanan chapter 13, verse 4, Yeshua rose from supper and laid aside his robe, and he took a cloth and tied it around his loins, and then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of his talmidim and to wipe them with the cloth which was tied around his loins. When he came to Shimon Kepha, Shimon said to him, "Are you, my Adon, going to wash my feet?" And Yeshua answered, saying to him, "What I am doing, you do not know now, but later you will understand." Then Shimon Kepha said to him, "You will never wash my feet." And Yeshua said to him, "If I do not wash you, you have no part with me." Shimon Kepha said to him, "Then my Adon, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." And Yeshua said to him, "He who has bathed does not need to wash except his feet only, for he is already clean. So you are all clean, but not every one of you." For Yeshua knew him who was to betray him, therefore he said, "Not every one of you is clean." When he had washed their feet, he put on his robes and sat down, and he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? And so you call me Rabbeinu, which means our rabbi, and Adonenu, which means our master. And what you say is well, for I am. If I then, your Adon and your rabbi, have washed your feet, how much more should you wash one another's feet? For I have given you this as an example, so that just as I have done to you, you should also do." Amen, amen, I say to you, there is no servant who is greater than his master, and no shaliach, which is a sent one, a representative, an ambassador, who is greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Okay? So the first part of this is kind of obvious in what he's fulfilled already, in that Yeshua has washed each of us. But here, he tells Kepha and the rest of them that they are already clean, and it was only necessary to wash their feet. And there was one person in the room, obviously, who was not clean, and Yeshua washed his feet, but it didn't take care of the rest of it, apparently. So how do you reckon that? How do you reconcile that with the fulfillment of Yeshua washing each of us? And I have to wait in a little bit of a lag to see if anyone has an answer, so I'm going to preview what our next paragraph is. Okay, no questions or comments about that? Goodness, repeat the question. Takes an hour to get back feedback. So what, how can we overlay the washing of the Talmudim over our lives in the sense of Yeshua washing us? Is there a relationship, or is this just applicable to his washing them? Because it was a very practical thing that he did for them. They had dirty feet, literally. They walked with sandals through dirt all the time. And so it was a customary thing to do to wash their feet. But Yeshua seems to apply this on a spiritual level, saying that one of them is unclean and the rest of them are clean, and they only have need for him to wash their feet. And if I read it right, Yehuda was still there and got his feet washed. So what kind of spiritual application can we look at in regard to either how Yeshua has fulfilled it on our behalf, or is there a future fulfillment of it on our behalf? Anyone else? Hopefully you see Betsy's answer. Well, the word doesn't need to be washed. I think you mean washing by the word. There's one verse that says that a husband purifies his wife by washing her in the word. Okay, I have two people that have answered and seem to be on the same track, maybe opposite rails, but on the same track. If we are washed, we are indeed washed in his blood. It's by his blood that he cleanses us from our sins, so yes. Very good, Joe. Well, yeah, receiving Yeshua initially would be our washing, but you got to remember, he said that it was only necessary to wash their feet. So, that's a mixing of metaphors there, Tracy. In this case, it's not immersion. So, everybody's on the right track. So let's try to hammer this down a little better. So yes, Yeshua washes us in his blood. We go through the waters of immersion. Typically, most believers only do it once. They go through the waters of immersion right after they believe, and they never immerse again. And there's nothing wrong with that. They don't understand in many ways the benefits of a re-immersion at a later time in life. And many of you understand that immersion is a continual part of our life of faith, and we teach that in the Techilat Hadavar, the basics of the word, that 6-part introductory series that we do. That immersion is an ongoing part of our lives. But this would not be immersion. This is the washing of the feet. This is an intimate time. This is Yeshua bearing himself down to the form of a servant and washing the feet of his Talmidim. And it was a very literal thing and a customary thing to do, to have a servant wash the feet of their guests. But here Yeshua, who was their master and their rabbi, who was a very respected individual in ancient Israel at the time, like it is today. You don't jack with the rabbi, you don't offend the rabbi, and you treat them with a great amount of respect. And here their rabbi is disrobing himself, bending down and washing their feet, taking on the role of a servant. And so what I believe we're seeing here is not our initial washing, because when we begin to trust, we're already washed. When we confess our trust in the blood of Yeshua, like many of you said, we are washed at that point. But someone pointed out that we go through this life and we still get dirty. And so prophetically, we're going to go through this washing of the feet process with Yeshua for the rest of our lives. And it should be that, because he said, I have done it unto you, you need to do it unto one another. It's the forgiveness of sins, I believe, that he's alluding to. So he just washed the feet of the guy that was about to betray him. Yeshua lived out that horror in his prayers a few hours later. He knew what was coming. He knew that Satan had already filled him up, and Yeshua washed his feet. What did he do? He symbolically forgave him ahead of time, and then subjected himself to Judas's wrath, if you will, to his betrayal. And so, yes, when we walk outside the Torah, we need forgiveness. When we stumble, we need forgiveness. And so we go to Yeshua intimately in our private prayer time, and he, like a servant, washes our feet every single time. But again, I do believe that this is also symbolic of us. There's a lot of people in the Messianic community who want to actually wash each other's feet. I would say that's not something we do customarily in Western society, where we wear shoes all day and walk on concrete. So I would prefer, if you want to wash something for me, go wash my car. If you just want to be a servant to me, my car needs a wash right now. It's been sitting here for 4 months, and I don't know how it got dirty, but it's dirty. But so I think the bigger lesson here is not just the washing of other people's 10 digits on the bottom of their legs, but the ability for someone to go, I confessed my sin one time to a brother, and immediately he turned around and trashed me. And that's happened more than once in my life, where I try to be vulnerable to a person that I think that has prostrated themselves perhaps in front of me, they told me they're my friend and my servant and not my master and my Lord. But as soon as I try to get intimate with them, they unleash on me instead of washing my feet and saying, you know what, Messiah has forgiven you of this. We don't do that for one another. And that's what makes everybody scared to death to show their vulnerabilities and their tendency to sin every once in a while. They don't want to share that with anybody because everybody's so dang judgmental. So I believe that that's what Yeshua is demonstrating here, is humility in the face of people who err all the time. And we don't have that a lot, especially a lot of times in the Messianic community. We don't have that. We would rather hold people accountable, and that's not what accountability is. I think it is a foreshadowing. He still is our sacrifice. We still have to express our faith to be cleansed, absolutely. But hopefully what I just said registered with y'all. I will wait for comments on that. Otherwise, we're going to move on. So we all know that Yehuda betrayed Yeshua And then Yeshua foretells of himself being glorified. And then in verse 36, Kepha says, where are you going? Because Yeshua said, I'm basically going somewhere and you can't follow. And he said, why can I not follow you now? I will even lay down my life for you. And this is where Yeshua says, will you lay down your life for me? Amen, amen. I say to you, the cock shall not crow until you have denied me 3 times. And so after later on in the narrative, Kepha actually betrays Yeshua, denies him 3 times, and then the rooster crows. Exactly. That's the compassion of Messiah, is that we don't hold others' sins against them, especially when they've shown contrition. We don't hold other people's sins against them. We don't, lord it over them. Yeshua didn't lord it over Kepha that he was about to betray him. He knew what was going to happen, and he didn't even lord it over him. He didn't lord it over Yehuda, even though he knew what was going to happen. So this brings us to chapter 14. Let not your heart be troubled. Trust in Elohim and trust in me also. In the house of Avi are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to me, so that where I am, you may be also. You know where I am going, and you know the way. All right, I'm going to break there, and then I'm going to scan through this chapter. I have to remind myself of something right quick, and then we're going to go over to Luca here in a second. Any comments or questions? All right, so we just read out of chapter 14. I want to explain something to you, how very different. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew, Yochanan, Marcos, and Luca, they are called by theologians the Synoptic Gospels, and the reason for that is they're very lockstep with one another. They all tell basically the same stories in the same order, a slight bit of variation in the details, but pretty much all the same stuff all the way through, where Yochanan Marcos is the most brief of the 3, and Matthew and Luca are a little bit more in detail with, I believe, Luke the physician was probably the most detailed. Okay, but Yochanan spends, whereas the other 3 spend a few verses on the Passover, Yochanan spends chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So the biggest part of his book, even though he covers basically 3.5 years of Yeshua's life, starting in John chapter 1 up to chapter 12, all of a sudden he zooms way in, I suppose. He was kind of at this panorama level, and then he zooms way in and zooms in on Passover and stays there and gives us a lot of the detail. But what the details that he left out were the order of the Seder. And so I wanted to show you what else he did and remind you, most of you probably know this, but remember, this is being recorded for future students as well. My computer is locking up on me all of a sudden. Don't you just hate technical issues? So we're going to go over briefly to Luca chapter, looks like about 22. And in verse 15, he says, I have greatly desired to eat this Pesach with you before I suffer. For I say to you that henceforth I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in Mahuta Elohim. And he took bread in verse 19, and he gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them and said, this is my body which is given for your sake. This do in remembrance of me. And likewise also he took the cup after they had eaten supper. And he said, this is the cup of the Brit Hadashah in my blood, which is shed for you. Okay. And what I wanted to go over here is the fact that this is a wedding betrothal. So basically that night, when Yeshua took that cup, he basically asked the whole world to marry him, be his bride. This was a wedding contract. Just like Elohim, God calls Israel his bride, and he hearkens back to the mountain when he calls them his bride. You were betrothed to me at the mountain, or wed to me at the mountain. I'd have to look. It's been a long time since I've read that. Nonetheless, it's there. This is Passover, and this is the betrothal of Yeshua, the Son of God, to his bride, which is anybody that would come along in the future from this night 2,000 years ago in 30 AD at Passover. Yeshua basically sealed the contract of betrothal with his bride and the bride's father. So, and how that was done, many of you know this, how that was done is that Yeshua, or a Jewish man, would, if he wanted to marry a young Jewish woman, the parents would agree to it. The son would go over with a bridal contract, go into the father's house, sit down with the parents, and they would pour a glass of wine. They would review the contract, and if they all agreed to the contract, including the bride, then they would seal their agreement with the contract by sharing a cup of wine called kiddush, or sanctification. So they would set apart that cup of wine as a sacred thing and enter into a betrothal. Erosin. And so, and that would go on for a year to 2 years. Back then, I think it was more like a year, but it could go up to 2 years. And so, at his betrothal in the ketubah, and I might as well put that in here because I think there's some new people, and there will be in the future. I think I spelled that right in Hebrew. It comes from the word to write, so it is the written agreement, what we would call a contract. And so the bride's duty, it was her duty to study the contract and prepare herself for the wedding. Whatever it said about her beauty, whatever it said about her dress, whatever it said about the money that she would bring to the relationship, I can't remember if that was part of it, but I think it was. She would prepare. His duty was to go away and build a house. Because back then, having a home was critical. They didn't want anyone to be homeless, and most people were very strapped for money most of the time. And so the dad did not want his daughter to end up homeless. And so the first thing that he would do is, in the part of the agreement, was to provide a home for his daughter. So he would go away and build that house. His father, the father of the groom, would preside over building that house. In other words, the young man had to build it himself. Today we would contract it. But he had to make sure that the house was built. And only the father of the bridegroom could say when the house was ready and suitable for a bride to live in. And so only his father knew when the day of the wedding would come. And typically, especially for royalty, and you got to remember, Yeshua himself was royalty. Miriam and Yosef were royalty. They were both descended from the kings of Israel. Both of them through the line of David. Both of them potential heirs or contributors or makers of heirs to the throne of David. And so royalty was married on Yom Teruah. So usually on a Tuesday. It's interesting that Yeshua's betrothal was on a Tuesday. Go back to our image and you will see that Yeshua had his Passover on a Tuesday night. Why Tuesday? Why do people in Israel still today like to get married on Tuesday? That's the third day of the week. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, the third day is when all of the fruits of the trees and all the grass of the field and everything that was green and verdant and anything that produced food to eat. Because you got to remember, in the first 1,000 years of mankind, we didn't eat animals. We only ate fruit and vegetables and greenery and stuff like that. And so that day is still seen in Judaism as a day that would bless you with fertility, life, if you married on it. And so the hope was, if you married on a Tuesday, you would be fruitful when you got married and you would have children. So only the father of the groom could say, okay, son, your house is ready, go and get your bride. So he would go get his bride typically in the nighttime. And at night, he would go, she would have her, what we would call ladies in waiting. She would have other virgins with her, because you got to remember, you had to be a virgin to marry back in those days. Would that it were still the same. But she would have her virgins with her waiting for her bridegroom. The bridegroom would leave his house. He's probably already packed all of his stuff in there and gotten it ready to live in, because the wedding is going to be held in that house. And so he would leave his house with his friends, the friends of the bridegroom, which Yeshua talked about quite a bit. And they would go halfway, and the groom would stop, and then the two friends would go and shout. At midnight, they would shout out that the bridegroom has come, the bridegroom has come. And the bride and her maids would get up, get ready, and go and leave. And they would together go to the house that he had built for his bride. They would have their wedding ceremony there, and they would spend 7 days in the inner chamber, the bedroom, and consummate the marriage by consummating the marriage bed with the two witnesses outside the door to make sure that it was done. And they would have physical proof of her virginity. And it was a great celebration, and they would stay in that house for 7 days. That's where the idea of a honeymoon actually comes from. They would stay in that house for 7 days to learn each other, and that only then would they come out. And so you see all of these things in a Messianic and in a Jewish wedding ceremony. But the point that I want to make is that Yeshua invoked this language at the Passover after he did the cup. Okay, it doesn't tell us the order. Yochanan doesn't give us the order of the Seder. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. And here in Luke, it tells us specifically that he took the cup after supper, which is the third cup of the Passover Seder, and that has been called the cup of redemption for thousands of years. And so he redeemed us by his blood. He said it. This is the cup of my blood, which is shed for many. Okay? And then Yeshua goes into the betrayal that was about to happen to him in Luke. So I'm going to go back to Yochanan chapter 14. Is everybody with me? So Yeshua he's sitting at a Passover Seder with these 12 guys, and I'm trying to see right quick if Yehuda had left yet. I can't remember if he had left in chapter 13. So he's sitting at this Seder. I'll try to figure that out later. And he tells them, I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again and take you to me, so that where I am, you may also be. This was a wedding betrothal. Just like the cup that he took at the Passover Seder the same night. That was the ketubah agreement. That was the agreement of the covenant. Yeshua ratified a covenant with us that we would be faithful to him, that we would purify ourselves and stay pure for him. and that when he returns, we would be pure, we would be virgins spiritually, and then he tells them probably after supper, and I think I can't remember, but I think Yehuda had left at this point. I'd have to look. Nope. Yeah. I think he had left at this point, but I'll verify that. He tells them basically wedding customs that that they're very familiar with. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go, I will come again and bring you to where I am, that you may be with me. And this is why it is so frustrating that so many people today don't think that the congregation is going to assemble in heaven. In my Father's house are many rooms. In the house of Avi are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. So Yeshua has been building a home for the last 2,000 years, and he's going to come and receive us to it. And we're going to be his bride. We're going to be very intimate with him at that time, like we never have been before. Even the intimacy that he displayed here for his Talmudim is nothing compared to what we're going to enjoy when we go into the Cheder above. And I don't know how that's going to be practically. It's all symbolism down here. The marriage bed was given to us to show us how intimate God wants to be with us, how intimate Yeshua wants to be with us in the sense that he would call us his bride. Anybody that's married should understand the sanctity of that, and how precious it is, and how intimate it is, and how ecstatic it is, and that's where we're headed spiritually, is for even a closer relationship than we have now. Right now, in a sense, Yeshua is far away, and we're having to just remember his words. Now, obviously, it's more than that. He is very present with us by the Ruach HaKodesh, but we've not seen him. We've never laid eyes on our bridegroom, and that takes a lot of trust, and that takes the Ruach HaKodesh to continue that. So let's read on. Teuma said, Adonenu, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know the way? And Yeshua said to him, I am Haderech, Ha'emet, and Ha'chayim. And I want to say it's in Mishlim chapter 6. All of those are pseudonyms for the Torah. In the book of Proverbs and in other places in the Psalms, the Torah is called the truth, the Torah is called the life, the Torah is called the way, over and over and over and over. And so this is proof that Yeshua is the Torah in flesh. He was basically saying, I am Haderech, I am Ha'emet, I am Ha'chaim. These men were so fond of Yeshua and attached to him as their rabbi. He just said that. You call me Rabbeinu, our rabbi. Yeshua is our only rabbi. And so these young men, who were probably 20 and above, were students of the Torah, following a rabbi who was teaching them the Torah, and they had grown up in Jewish synagogues all their life, 52 times a year going into the synagogue. And they knew that when you say Haderech, you're talking about the Torah, and when you say Ha'emet, you are talking about the Torah, and when you say Ha'chaim, you're talking about the Torah. No man comes to Avi except by me. You cannot come to the Father except through the Torah, the Derek, the way, the truth, and the life. You can't do it. If you come to him through a version of Yeshua that is not the word in flesh, the word including Genesis through Deuteronomy, especially the foundation of the word, your faith may be in question. So, and then he says, if you had known me, you would have known Avi also. From henceforth you know him and you have seen him. And so Yeshua is getting very explicit. Our little congregation, Migdash Mi'at, we're going to have a Zoom on Sunday about Yeshua. Because this is a critical doctrine. And most of our folks understand this, but they want to understand it better. So we're going over that in detail. Yeshua was basically telling them, I am a perfect manifestation of my Father. My Father gave you the Torah. This is how you get to where I am going. I'm going there because of my obedience to the Torah, and you're going to get there the same way, is basically what he was saying. Do you not believe that I am in Avi, and Avi is in me? The words that I speak, I do not speak of myself. But Avi, my Father, who abides in me, does these works. Referring right back to the Torah. Trust that I am in Avi, and Avi is in me, and if not, trust because of the works. Amen, amen, I say to you, he who trusts in me shall do the works which I do. And even greater than these things shall he do, because I am going to Avi. And whatever you ask in my name, I will do it for you, so that Ha'av may be glorified through his Son. If you ask in my name, I will do it. And then he says, if you love me, keep my mitzvot. Any questions or comments? I got a text, but no questions or comments. Okay. Any questions? So I want to go over the cheder, the rooms that Yeshua was talking about, and we did this a little bit, I think, in our first study. But again, we're studying the prophetic nature of our lives, and so when Yeshua, that's probably the most prophetic thing that Yeshua did at the Passover Seder, other than prophesying our. That's part of it, Daniel. Other than prophesying our being washed, our entering into the covenant by trust in his blood, he also prophesied that we would go and assemble with him in a house above. So that was a very prophetic thing. It's very important. So I'm going to answer Daniel's question here. Commandments being to honor the Sabbath, question mark, obviously, yes, that is part of it. Bavel has come along. The harlot has come along, mixture, religion, confusion has come along and moved the Sabbath. And I will reiterate that. Constantine moved the Sabbath in his official decree of making Sunday the day of worship for Christians. He said it. And I'm repeating this. I think I said this last week, but again, it's critical to understand. Let us no longer worship with that odious, disgusting people, the Jews. Let us from henceforth worship on the glorious day of Sol Invictus. So yes, keeping the Sabbath is part of it. Keeping all of the 7 other feasts of Elohim, which are listed in Leviticus 23, is part of it. More importantly, keeping those mitzvot that are in about Shemot, Exodus chapter 21, the ones that teach us about how to deal with our neighbors. I posted it today that the Torah is full of compassion and grace. And so the Torah teaches us how to understand what God's compassion is. And again, that's what Yeshua was teaching here at Passover is if you're following me, then you're going to love one another, and you're going to love one another so much you're going to forgive each other of their sins, even when you know they're wronging you. But yes, Sabbath is part of that. God loves his Sabbath. I believe it's Yeshayahu chapter 56 through 58. You can look through there and see the heart of God on the Sabbath. And then you can see in about chapter 61 maybe of Isaiah, or 65, 66, somewhere along in there, he says that you're going to come up week after week during the millennial reign to observe my Sabbaths. And then over in Zechariah chapter 14, he says you're going to come up year after year to keep Sukkot, and if you don't, I'm going to punish you. And that's during the millennial reign, when Yeshua is here and all the nations believe in him and trust in him and see him with their eyes. And some people are still going to be dastardly enough and bold enough not to go to Sukkot, not to keep it. Just like people today will not keep it, and he will punish them for it. He's not sending them to hell, but they're going to go through the tribulation or not participate in the first Natsal and in the wedding. They're going to be the second group among of the bride, and we'll get into that later. I have spoken these to you. Here's another prophetic thing that Yeshua says. I'm in verse 25 of Yochanan chapter 14. I have spoken these things to you while I am with you, but the Comforter, the Ruach HaKodesh, which Avi will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of everything which I tell you. Shalom I leave with you, my shalom I give you, not as the world gives do I give to you, but let not your heart be troubled and do not be afraid. You heard that I told you I am going away, I will come to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice because I go to Avi, for Avi is greater than I. And now behold, I have told you before it happens, so that when it does happen, you may believe. Hereafter I will not talk much with you, for the prince of this world comes, and yet he has nothing in me. But that the world may know that I love Avi, and as Avi has commanded me, so I do. Arise, let us go away from here. I am the vine of truth, and Avi is the caretaker. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he cuts off. And the one which bears fruit, he prunes, so that it may go forth and bring forth more fruit. Let's see. That's correct, Joe. There is a clear difference between the Sabbaths of God and the Sabbaths of men. And that can be both a Sabbath that the Jewish people would keep, like they moved the Sabbath of first Passover and seventh Passover. They moved both of those by a day, possibly two on the end. I'd have to look at that. And then moving, the Christianity moving their sacred day over to the first day of the week, that's their Sabbath. That's not God's Sabbath. And so, yes, and you'll see that in Isaiah 56 through 58, how his Sabbath is wonderful. It's a delight. That's where we get the word oneg from, which means Sabbath delight, which is what most of us use to talk about fellowship on Shabbat. So here, I want to talk about the Ruach HaKodesh, which is a promise that Yeshua made to the Talmidim that night. You got to remember, at this point, they are clean. Yeshua has been washing them with his word, just like we men are commanded to wash our wives with the word. And by the same token, ourselves. He tells us, so they haven't received the Ruach HaKodesh yet. They probably felt it. They've certainly seen the power of it. Yeshua had demonstrated the power of it, walking on water, raising people from the dead, restoring sight to the blind. That's kind of what he was talking about with his works, doing all these miracles. So they had seen the power of it. They probably experienced it and felt it when they were around him. I would love to have been there and felt the Ruach just emanating off of him. So they know it, but they haven't received it in themselves. They haven't been transformed from death to life just yet. That doesn't happen until the resurrection, because it couldn't happen until the resurrection. So, hey, Jordan, shalom. So, he says here, I'm going away so that I can send the Comforter. And I wanted to look at that. Give me just 1 second. Verse 26. You're going to like this if you remember your modern Israeli history at all. You remember Menachem Begin? Anybody remember Menachem Begin of Israel? Who is he? What did he do? Bueller. Hurry up, Facebook. Vit. Maher. Does anybody remember Menachem Begin? Menachem, comforter. That's what Yeshua called the Ruach HaKodesh. And Menachem Begin was a prime minister of Israel back in the late 80s, early 90s, perhaps. Does Jim remember that? Am I right? Yep, prime minister. So that word, Menachem, means comforter. And so Yeshua said it comes from the word nach, which has mem on it. So it's, you got to see this. That's the word nach. And that means comfort. What we're looking at is Menachem, which is a mem, and Noah's name, and a chet, Menachem. I'm sorry, a final mem, a mem sofit. I didn't kill you guys, did I? I hit a wrong keystroke, and my computer's acting up on me all of a sudden. That is Noah with water on both sides of it. Noach, Menachem. I find that interesting that is the name of the comforter. And so what was on the ark that protected Noach? What made the boat float? What floats your boat? My wife said it. Does anybody else know? Yes. This is not a yes or no question, Tracy. You probably answered something else, but I don't know what you're answering. What protected Noah on the boat? What kept the boat from sinking? Melanie said it. Pitch. Thank you. And that's the same root word as kafar, which is atonement. So I just wanted us to understand what could possibly be one of the purposes of the Ruach HaKodesh is to protect us from this world. You know, if you consider it, Noach was put in the boat. God sealed the door, exactly, Betsy. God sealed the door, but before he did, Noach had to build this boat, and he went in and he put the pitch, which is basically like black tar, if I'm understanding it right, all through the boat to seal up the boat to keep the water out, probably on inside and out, if I remember right, to keep the water out of the boat, and because his boat was made of wood, and he couldn't put shellac on it. It didn't exist at the time. So whatever he made that he called pitch, the same root there is atonement. And of course, we are atoned for by the blood of Messiah. And so the Ruach and the blood are working together here. And so our comfort is in the Ruach and its protection. Even though the waters are all around us, we still have protection. I just thought that was a good thing to see. I am the vine of truth, and Avi is the caretaker. Every branch of me that does not bear fruit, he cuts off. If you notice it, Yehuda probably got cut off that night. The others, he prunes to make it bring forth more fruit. And of course, we're talking about fruit on a Tuesday, which is significant. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who remains in me and I in him will bear abundant fruit. For without me you can do nothing. Unless a man remains in me, he will be cast outside like a branch, which is withered. So I want to look at something again. We are in Yochanan 15. Verse 6. Im tamdu bidvari yamadu bachem. Aval im tamdu bi udvari ya'amdu bachem. What is he saying there? This is verse 7. If you will stand in me, and my word will stand in you. That's what Yeshua says there in verse 7. Remain, abide, stand firm in me, and my words remain in you. Whatever you ask shall be done for you. In this, Ha'av will be glorified, that you bear abundant fruit and be my Talmudim. What does it mean to stand? The word there in Hebrew is amad. It literally means to stand up. But it's kind of like the connotation is being still, not moving around, but having your feet planted. Okay. So I got a little sidetracked here because I got excited about what was coming up and I forgot to go finish the part about the rooms. Does anybody want to do that? There's scriptures where I believe Yeshua drew from to talk about the wedding that we would be attending. Everybody there? I think we went over these in a previous Torah study not too long ago. So if you were with us, you probably remember that. And if you weren't, then you could probably go back. You could probably go back. I still don't know what your yes means, Tracy. So I've got a couple of questions here. I'm going to address those, and then I'll come back to that. Daniel asks, can you spend a moment discussing whatever we ask in his name? So that, you got to remember, Bavel comes along and confuses people. If there's confusion, then Hasatan is involved. And so, people come along and say, see, I can ask for anything and my God will give it to me. He has to. Is that what Yeshua was saying here? Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it for you. For one thing, they forget the predicate, or they forget the previous phrase or clause. Tracy wants to go over the rooms, so we will. If you remain, if you stand, remain, abide, stand firm in me, and my words remain in you. Look at the previous phrase, though, in verse 6. I had said it, and I had elaborated on it only a tiny bit, but I'm going to put that whole verse in here and see if there's any deeper insight in the Hebrew. Excellent, Jim. You touched it right away. In his character. Imenenu omed bi. If y'all do not stand in me. That's the question. So what does that mean? If you are not unified with me, if you do not stand still with me, if you're moving off in your own direction, if all you're concerned about is your own thoughts, if you're not doing his commandments, then you're not listening to him anyway. And that's the funny thing about people that say they hear from God all the time. Is they say they hear from God all the time, but when his word speaks, they don't listen. And so that's why so many people who are, by and large, these people are decent people in regard, if you're using a human measuring stick and measuring them against other humans, they're not doing anything most of the time egregious when they go around in what we call word of faith and name it, claim it denominations that think they have all the power of God and think they can demonstrate it. And they're most of the time they're not following the mitzvot, the commandments, which is what precedes this. If you love me, you keep my word, and I will love you, and I will come to you and make a place of abode with him. And that's what Yeshua is talking about when he says, if you stand in me, make a place of abode, a place to dwell with him, in him. Okay, so Yeshua wants to unify himself with us. And if we stay there, if we stay unified with him, then we will ask whatever we want, because what we want matches what he wants. And if what we want matches what he wants, there's no doubt it's going to be done, because we're not doing it in just the willpower of the mind or imagining that God wants it to because he loves me so much. But we know what Yeshua wants, and so we say, hey, Yeshua. Or we know what God wants, and so we say, hey, Yeshua, this is my prayer, thus and so. And of course, because it matches God's will, it's going to be done. And I have an example of that. And I tell this story, not a lot, but it's probably one of the more powerful moments in my life that involves something like this. And that is when my wife and I had been married. We lived in Kirbyville, her hometown. It was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a Wednesday night. It was later in the night. It was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And my brother called. And my brother was one who was 3 years before healed in our living room right in front of my wife and me. His broken neck. He'd had a wreck. Some of you know the story. Had a wreck, flipped his car off over into a creek that was just bigger than a river. And nearly died, and got up and miraculously got up and made it up to the highway, which was about 50 feet above, and was found with a broken neck, put in the ICU, and then we were praying for him at the same time. 3 years later, my brother calls me on a Wednesday night because he knows that God answers the prayers of the righteous. And so he called me and said, my friend, and I'd never met this friend before, my friend's grandfather is in the hospital. They're going to take out his left lung tomorrow. Will you come and pray for him? And it was Wednesday night. And that was a righteous thing to do. It would have been a kind thing for me to do, but it was late at night and I had to go to work the next day, and I worked 35, 40 miles away, and I had to get up early to do it, to get there on time, and I honestly didn't want to do it, but I said, I don't know, David, it's kind of late at night. Can we do it tomorrow or something like that? And he pushed me again, and all of a sudden I heard the word of God in my mind. If a man walks with you a mile, go with it. Ask you to walk a mile with him, go with him too. If he asks you for his coat, give him your cloak as well. And so I said, okay. Long story short, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but basically that man, that grandfather, the next day at 1 o'clock, I got the report from my brother and his friend, who were both beside themselves because they sewed him back up and did not take out his left lung. And they told me on the phone, MRIs, CAT scans, x-rays, everything. They were 99% sure it was a destroyed lung from smoking, and it had to go. There was only a little bit of scar tissue. He was completely healed. So I didn't do that because I wanted it done for my sake and for, show, but God wanted it done, and God brought them to me. I didn't go to them. And so in that instance, when I put my hand on that man's chest, I knew there was zero doubt this was the will of God. And I didn't even speak. I just put my hand on him and asked God in my heart and in my mind, touch him. And I knew that that's all that needed to be done. All I asked was touching Yeshua, and I could feel and see Yeshua in the room doing that. And when I opened my eyes, everybody in the room was bawling. So, it is our will aligning with Yeshua, with God, and we being in righteousness. Then at that point, yes, anything that we ask, because we're not going to ask for frivolity. We're not going to ask for ourselves. We're not going to ask for wealth. We're not going to ask for blessings and all this stuff. What this is talking about is the furtherment of the kingdom of God. And if we do that, then he will bless us in regard to all of the life's blessings, and we don't have to worry about that. So that, I believe, is what he's talking about. So hopefully that answered that, Daniel. Let me see. Let me catch up on everybody's comments and questions. Yeah, I think I answered that question. I see your comment there. Tracy wants to go over the rooms. We will do that here in a minute. In his character. That may be the case. It seems like, Tracy, I've read that where they would speak in the name of their rabbis, but I can't say that for sure anymore. I'd have to look that up. You mean God is not a genie in a bottle waiting to give us all our desires? Such sarcasm. So hopefully we've addressed that. So let's go back to, if anybody has any comments about that, let me know before we move on. We'll spend the last 30 minutes maybe or so, maybe 15 on the cheder. Let me get my scriptures ready while maybe someone's typing a question. Now, even as I read this, I see that I'm pretty sure that we went over this in our previous study, but it won't hurt to do it again, I suppose, especially given the time that we're in and what's going on in the world right now, because I think we could be getting close to this. Yeah, that could be. He equaled himself with Elohim. He said, I proceeded forth and came out of my father, Betsy. And then for him to say that boldly, and then to pull off the things he pulled off, yeah, they were astonished. Of course, even the Pharisees were. So we're going to go to Yeshayahu chapter 26. And we're going to go over this concept of the groom coming to get his bride and taking her back to his house, and they go into a cheder, a room. And I told you a while ago when we were discussing this that while Yeshua was doing this on Passover, he was doing it on a Tuesday night, and I told you that the kings of Israel tended to get married at Yom Teruah, and so it was customary to marry them then. That was the beginning of the year for tracking time, and the kingdom of God began on that day, you could say. And so Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 26 says in verse 2, and we went over this, open the gates, that the righteous nation that keeps faithfulness may enter in. Keeps faithfulness. That's language of a bride, is it not? That's what a bridegroom in those days was looking for, was faithfulness. For a year or two you have been betrothed to me. I hope that you have remained faithful to me. We all know how strong the temptation is to copulate with someone before we're married. It was a great struggle for me remaining a single man up until I was nearly, almost 27 years old. And I was an oddity, even at just that age. Today, anybody that's that old and still pure must be something wrong with them. It's not in our mind to do that. But back then it was in their mind to do that. Keeps faithfulness. Those who keep faithfulness may enter in. What did Yeshua do to the virgins who had not trimmed their lamps? He rejected them. He didn't let them in. The mind stayed on you. You keep in perfect shalom because it trusts in you. Trust in Yahweh forever, for in Yah is Yahweh an everlasting rock. He has brought them down that dwell on high, the lofty city, laying it low, laying it down to the ground, bringing it even to the dust. Okay, so we've established, what I wanted to do is establish again that this is Yom Teruah, and then go down to verse 20. Go, my people. Let's back up a little bit. I don't remember how deep we dove into these previous verses the last time we talked about this, so we'll do that a little deeper. Yahweh, in trouble they have sought you. Silently they poured out a prayer when your chastening was upon them. Like a woman with child that draws near to the time of her delivery, is in pain and cries out in her pangs, so have we been at your presence, O Yahweh. Is there anybody in the broadcast tonight who feels that way, like trouble has hit us and we're crying out, I just want this to be over with? Anybody? I'm willing to bet just about every one of us. I'm going to wait. I know there's a lag. I want to see some comments on that. Bueller? Yahweh Batzar Pekaducha. Tzakun Lachash. Musar Lamo. Okay, verse 17. Kemo Hara Takriv Laledet. Tachil. Tizak. Bechavalea. I'm going to copy that and paste it in there for those of you that are Hebrew students. Okay, so it looks like I've got some affirmation to my last statement. Do you feel like those verses, like wish it would just end? And Teresa's there quoting Don Henley. Or no, Phil Collins. All we want to do is focus on him. So verse 17. She is close to giving birth. Tachil tizak echavlea. The third word, and the last word. Birth pangs. She travails in birth pangs. Travails, birth pangs is basically the same thing. These are the birth pangs of the Messiah. I personally believe that if we're not there, then I don't understand what birth pangs are. And I would dread another time coming where we're in birth pangs if we are not right now in birth pangs. And I think you all understand what I'm saying. But like a woman with child that draws near to the time of her delivery is in pain and cries out in her pangs, so we have been at your presence, O Yahweh. We have been with child. We have been in pain. We've given birth to the wind. We've not wrought any deliverance in the land. Neither are the inhabitants of the world come to life. There's this dread. Amen. Me too, Betsy. So there's this dread that is said to be when the birth pangs of Messiah start, and that is that, you know, and I have felt this way, and you can ask my wife. She is an encourager in her nature, and at times I feel like I teach and I teach and I teach and I teach and I teach, and no one's responding and no one's benefiting from it, and we can't, you know, you better save a rock than a person. It seems like these days you can declare and declare and declare and declare, and people would rather have the sugar and the junk that's out there instead of the meat of His Word and salvation and truth. So that's what I believe we're talking about right there. We're struggling. We want to give birth, but all we've done is pass gas. We're giving birth to the wind. None of the inhabitants of the land come to life. It's hard to save anybody these days. And I really feel that. But look at what it says. Your dead shall live. And then it reverses the subject. My dead bodies shall arise. Awaken, sing, you that dwell in the dust. For your dew is as the dew of light. Remember what we talked about on Shabbat? Mikdash Me'at, about being dew and being rain, showers of shalom for everybody. Your dew is as the dew of light, and the earth shall bring to life the shades. The shades is those who are dead, who are in paradise, who are awaiting the resurrection. And Elohim is going to bring them to life. And then look what it says. Now I gotta know that I don't want to. You gotta stop doing that, Tracy. And so right after he says, awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust. That's the dead. You that dwell in the dust. It says, go my people, come into your chederim and shut your doors about you. Hide yourself for a little moment until the indignation passes. Chederim. Cheder is the singular. Chederim is the plural. Go into your rooms. Yeshua said, in my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come to you and receive you to myself, just like a bridegroom does. I will go. I will come to you and I will bring you back into those rooms. Okay? And so here, after he says, arise from the dead, go my people into your chederim. Now, mind you, even those of us who are alive at the moment of the blast of the shofar, it's a translation from death or mortality into life or immortality. So this next phrase applies to both people groups, the dead in Messiah and the remnant. Go, my people, come into your chederim and shut your doors about you. Hide yourself for a little moment until the indignation passes. And of course, that's the tribulation. That's God's wrath. He is sending out his messengers to bring havoc on the earth. We're not there yet. There are people who are saying that all the angels are opening their scrolls and it's all... No, we're not there yet. This is just birth pangs. This is the light stuff. You think about it. The Holocaust was far worse than this in regard to what the Jews suffered and what the whole world was going through. What we're going through right now is unprecedented in regard to a global pandemic that's bringing down our economies, especially given that it's manufactured. I'm not saying it's unreal. I know very much how real it is, but it was manufactured. It's a weapon of warfare, and it was for a psyop that the Chinese and Democrats cooperated on to bring our country down. But that's and that's bad, but it's not. It's still not as bad as it was at World War II. And the tribulation that Yeshua is talking about, he said of it himself in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, it's going to be worse than the world has ever known. So I'm having that my usual message. We made it further than I usually do. Are you still with me? Just give me some affirmation of that. Okay, 2 questions appeared. First is Tracy's. Again, give me some affirmation that you're still with me because my screen went black. Is there a difference from his judgment and his wrath in that day? No, there's not. It's just the use of two different words to mean the same thing, because judgment in that sense can mean a sentence of punishment. Okay, so in that sense, so sometimes English words and even Hebrew words are interchangeable like that. But so it's basically the same thing. It's the judgment of his punishment. It's a decree of punishment. So effectively the same thing. So what else? If it is like this with the remnant, what will it be like without the remnant? Yes. So what I believe Betsy is saying is that if the world can go through such troubles as these while the believers who are righteous are still here, then how bad will it actually be when the remnant is not here and evil is completely unleashed? So I do believe that it will get ugly, ugly, ugly during that time. We've seen people's hearts. My wife and I were talking about it just a few hours ago. We've seen the decay and the stench of wickedness in the public conversation rapidly change. And one of the evidences of that is Don Lemon. People say it differently. It's Lemon. It's a French word, but a lot of people say Don Lemon. He's a CNN broadcaster. And way back 7 years ago, oddly enough, 7 years ago, he was on the side of the black community needing to start to rebuild the nuclear family again and have people raised in a home. And now 7 years later, he's of the mind that ain't nothing wrong with the black community. It's all white people are the problem. So, and then, we were talking also about another guy, one of the actors that we used to like years ago, 20 years ago, when the show he was on was famous, who's now recorded as publicly. He himself has declared himself to be a pedophile. And he never would have made that public 20 years ago. But now it's in vogue to do. It's okay to just throw out there, disgusting things about children. It's ridiculous. And so, yeah, and we're still here. Those of us who believe are still here. And weak little fools like me are still posting YouTube videos trying to change the world. And it's not happening. I had somebody ask me, how many people do you think we can save? Not very many. It's hard enough to get believers to come to the truth, much less the wicked people who love their sins. So it is going to be very different. When the Ruach HaKodesh takes away a small remnant that has been preserving the world like salt, it's going to be ugly. Let's see. I think I covered all the questions. Okay. Now I want to show you, we're transitioning from 26 to 27 in Isaiah. And you see that in that day, Yahweh with his sore and great strong sword will punish Leviathan, the slant serpent, and Leviathan, the tortuous serpent. He will slay the dragon that is in the sea, and in that day sing of her a vineyard of foaming wine. All of that is language that is directly echoed and even expounded on in the Hikalut. We see the destruction of Leviathan, the great and slant serpent, the crooked serpent. We see that in the book of the Hikalut. So you have the book of the Hikalut preceded by somebody rising from the dead and going into some rooms. So now let's go to Yoel. And the book of Yoel is difficult to tell you what scriptures to go to if you're reading from anything other than a Hebrew Tanakh. So if you're reading from something other than Hadavar, you're not going to be with me. I can't even guess as to where you will be, because the chapters are misaligned in Joel, in the book of Joel, in a Gentile Bible. So we are going in Hadavar to chapter 2. Yoel, Joel, chapter 2. Then we're also going to go to chapter 3. But when we do that, I think we will still be in chapter 2 in a standard Bible. So anyway, the verses may not line up. But in Joel chapter 2, at the beginning of it, it says, "Blast the shofar in Zion, sound an alarm in my Har Kodesh, my set-apart sacred mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for Yom Yeruah comes, for it is at hand, a day of darkness and gloominess, clouds and thick darkness, blackness spread upon the mountains. A great people and mighty, there has not been ever the like, neither shall ever be any more after them, even to the years of many generations. A fire devours before them, and behind them a flame of blazes. The land is as Gan Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yes, and nothing escapes them. The appearance of them is the appearance of horses and horsemen, so do they run." Blah, blah, blah. It continues on and describes all of that. Basically, tribulation, tribulation, tribulation. Get down to verse 12. "Even now, says Yahweh, turn unto me with all your heart, with fasting and with weeping and lamentation." Lamentation is a result of judgment. "Turn unto Yahweh your Elohim, for he is gracious and merciful, long-suffering and abundant in compassion, and sorrows from the evil." God doesn't like to put evil on the world. It has to be done. "Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, even a mincha and a neshech unto Yahweh your Elohim." So all of this is describing the day of Yahweh. You have to remember, if you look at the world week, I used to draw this when I was teaching this. I would draw the world week, and all of you know what that is. It's basically, I'm going to try something here. That's a picture of the world week, even though it doesn't look very good. There's basically 8 lines and 7 spaces. So each of those spaces between 2 of the lines, going from right to left because we're Hebrew, is a day in the world week. The world week is 7,000 years long. The last day is the Shabbat of the world week. It's the 7th millennium. And that is the day of... And it starts with wrath. Okay? It's the day of the vengeance of our God, as Yeshua almost said in the synagogue 2,000 years ago, but he stopped. Yom Nakam Eloheinu. That's the day of Yahweh, the day of the vengeance of our God. Yeshua said that in his synagogue in 27 AD, and he stopped, and so basically he was declaring Dror, the liberty. He was declaring a Yovel, and here we are, 7 years away from 40 Yovels later. The 40th Yovel from the day that Yeshua did that will be in 2027. We're 7 years away from that. We're at the end of a Yovel cycle of 40 Yovels, and 40 is the number of judgment, so it is entirely possible that Yeshua could come back in 2027, but before he does that, all of this has to happen. And so if that's the case, then we are at dusk, just like we are right now outside. We are at dusk on the millennial clock. If I'm right about the date, and I could be wrong, I'm not saying that it's true, but if I'm right about the date, then we could be at dusk of the blasting of the shofar and the beginning of the wrath of God. And that will go on for 7 years. And that will start on Yom Teruah. Now look at verse 15, which is the beginning of Ha'azinu, one of our parashot. Blast the shofar, so we're blasting the shofar again. In Sion, consecrate a fast. Call a solemn assembly. Gather the people. Consecrate the congregation. Assemble the elders. Gather the children and those that nurse at the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth from his cheder, and the bride out of her chuppah. It's interesting to me that the word we use there is chuppah, and it's the same idea. It's like room or chamber, okay? So cheder or chuppah, chamber or room or chamber, it's the same phenomenon, means the same thing. But isn't it interesting that at a Jewish wedding, we use a chuppah for the bride and groom to marry under. And there's an explanation for that. But the reason that we bring up chuppah is because it's the bridal chamber. Is the bridegroom shall go forth from his cheder and the bride out of her chuppah. So the wedding has been consecrated, consummated. It's happened up in heaven, and the bridegroom is going forth. What blast of the shofar is this? I've taught this over and over. I'm going to put it in one spot so new people can understand it. The first shofar was blown at Shavuot, prophetically already blown again. It was blown at Shavuot back when Moshe was at the base of the mountain, and a yovel sounded long, and the shofar blasted and blasted and blasted the way it reads in Hebrew. That was the first shofar. That one was echoed. That was a physical shofar, that was the beginning of Israel. But on Shavuot, 2,000 years later, after Yeshua ascended, going to start building the house, then the shofar of Shavuot blasted again. That was the first shofar prophetically. Okay, so that one's already blown. The next one that we're waiting on is the last shofar, which is seen in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 5. And so, but the one that we just read about in Yoel chapter 2, verse 15 is the great shofar. And this is the one that you see in Matthew, I want to say it's chapter 24. You do not see the last shofar in Matthew 24. This is why people don't understand Matthew 24, and this is why there's so many arguments over when that shofar blows, because it matches this narrative in Yoel, and it doesn't match the narrative in Yeshayahu 26, where a shofar is also blasted. Is everybody with me? I think that came out pretty clear this time. I went a little bit fast because I don't have feedback here. So are you all with me? That's critical stuff. We're out of time anyway, so I'm going to let that ruminate and bubble. And if you have questions, just ask me. And then we'll wrap up. Thoughts, comments, questions? Bueller? No, there's three, Betsy. First shofar, last shofar, and great shofar. But there are 7 shofars blown in between during the tribulation. So effectively there's 10. The last shofar, Daniel, is the one that would be the natsal, the catching away, what you're calling rapture. That is the last shofar. Shaul says that plainly. He's giving us the day when he says, the last shofar shall sound, the dead in Messiah shall rise, and we who are alive and are the remnant will ascend to be with our Master forever. Great shofar blast at the end of the tribulation on Yom Kippur. Let me go back and establish that. We read it, but I need to establish it. Blast the shofar in Zion, consecrate a fast. The only fast commanded in the scriptures is Yom Kippur. Consecrate a fast, call a solemn assembly. That is Yom Kippur language. Gather the people, consecrate the congregation, assemble the other elders, gather the children and those that nurse at the breast. In other words, no one's excused from Yom Kippur. Let the bridegroom go forth from his cheder. This is the returning of the bride with Messiah. Messiah is coming out of heaven. He's returning to earth with his bride. You see that over in Luke chapter 19. 10 is a significant number, yes. Any other questions or comments? We've got 5 minutes. Yes. Yeshua puts his foot down on Yom Kippur. Yes. No, the horns of Avraham represent the first and last shofar. First one Shavuot, second one Yom Teruah. Was this too redundant? Because I know some of you have heard it before. We've gone over it before. I know it's at the forefront of everybody's mind right now. That's kind of why I'm compelled to do it. I wanted you to see how it's associated with Passover, because we are in our betrothal, and we are in that point where we are waiting for the consummation of the wedding, for the wedding to happen, so that it can be consummated. And so this is what Yeshua was talking about when he said, "I'm coming for a spotless bride." So all of you, many of you have expressed, some of you have probably thought it and didn't type it, that you want to be ready against that day in case it does happen this year. And that's very wise, and it's wise to think that way right now, because so many things are happening that that indicate that it very possibly could be this year. I can't say that it is going to be. I can tell you, I hope it is, and I pray that it is, because I'm sick of this dark world. I'm at times weary of the struggle. I have the same frustration that's expressed there in Yeshayahu chapter 26. Oh my goodness, nobody will come to life. This is ridiculous. That's how it feels. Excellent, Tracy. Thank you for that. So I'm going to wait just 30 seconds, another minute, and then we're going to sign off with a prayer, and I'll let you guys go. Absolutely, it's good to be ready at all times, because we don't know when our little personal netzal would happen. So it is good to be ready at all times, but certainly, being ready for death and being ready for a netzal, I believe, are two different things. Because if you're not ready for a netzal, then there are earthly consequences, as well as heavenly. So to me, it's just a little more dire, especially if we got any inkling that it might happen this year. All right, so let's say a little prayer and sign off. Avinu Malkeinu, we thank you for your word. We ask you for clarification of it, clear understanding. Take away anything that we said in error and correct it, and help us to come to truth. For those that are watching that do not know us and are new, we ask that you reveal to them your truth. And we ask, Abba, that you save whoever is available and has ears to hear. And we pray that we always have ears to hear your word. And we just ask you to be with us until Shabbat, when we can assemble. B'Shem Yahweh Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. Shalom lehitraot. I'll see you guys next time. Shalom.